Hi, this is Dr. Mike with Jay Gunkelman, and you're listening to the NeuroNoodle Podcast.
Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology Podcast, featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He is the man who has read over 500,000 brain scans. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle Podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Like our gold supporter, Applied Neuroscience, and our silver supporter, Mind Media. Earn up to 16 CEU hours by attending Applied Neuroscience's NeuroGuide workshops. In Madeira Beach, Florida, they're led by none other than Dr. Robert Thatcher himself. There are two ways you can attend, online or in person, with a link appliedneuroscience.com/attend-ng-workshops. Earn up to 16 CEU hours. Sign up now at appliedneuroscience.com/attend-ng-workshops. Mind Media. Get the latest EEG and neurofeedback technology from mindmedia.com. Their semi-dry sensor caps is a wonder to see, and their EEG amplifiers have been trusted in the field for decades. Their neurofeedback and QEEG courses will get you up to speed in no time. Visit mindmedia.com now.
Good. So Jay, could we use that to test food or liquids for various contaminants?
In fact, it's a wonderful way to end up identifying a lot of things. What we set it up for was specifically to look for emissions coming across a fence line. But you can use the same laser technology for lots of things. Measuring distance, the coherence of laser beams. Is your wavelength off a little bit? You can actually measure stuff very, very, very accurately. In fact, beams from space, NASA has been measuring sea level rise very accurately from space. You can measure with less than a millimeter what's the height of the ocean in an area. So lasers are becoming more and more and more common. Sorting food products in a production facility. My brother built a human food processing plant in Fargo, North Dakota, of course, and
that's what we call Pete.
and it's all done with compressed air. A normal plant would have a drag bucket or an auger to move the seeds around. And this uses compressed air. It's like a gigantic controlled hurricane. But it has little electric eyes and lasers. The lasers will identify the size of the seed, and a little puff of air will sort it onto one side or the other of a bin. So you end up separating nut meat into smaller and bigger nut meats and everything, all automated. But lasers are used for measurement and detection, but they're also used for speciation of the quality of the air. Actually, the lasers we used in the refineries had been used previously, but most people didn't know about them. Remember the Gulf War? Not the recent one. No. Back. Remember Saddam Hussein? He was hiding in the little caves and whatnot. Well, when we finally got all that settled, we had inspectors going around. And the inspectors would knock on the door of a facility, and the facility would say, "Who's there?" It's us inspectors who say, "Wait a minute, we'll be back tomorrow to let you in." And in the meanwhile, they're dumping or flushing or burning or whatever. And how do you know what they're doing? Well, you set up a laser downwind, and you see what you pick up in the lasers downwind. They had weapons inspectors that used lasers. Now, they weren't using the way we're using them. They were using more like they had traditionally been used in a cloud chamber, a meter diameter laser with a meter length path is a cloud chamber. A meter, a cubic meter of area to look at gas interactions within. So they were using that in an open field with a, maybe a 20-meter length or a 10-meter length or something like that, downwind of these facilities. There was nobody who knew how far a beam could be shot and still work, how long the averaging time needed to be. The design of the fence line system for a refinery still had to be done. And that's what we did. Actually doing the testing to see, can you shoot a meter long beam? Yeah, we can. Can you shoot a kilometer long beam? We don't know. Well, let's do it and see. So, we kicked the tires quite a bit on the what had been being done by DARPA, and turned it into a pollution detection system. But I've been messing with EIR stuff for a long, long time. Sierra Club called me an EIR hitman. They would hand me a stack or a stack of documents and say, this project, wherever it happens to be, is being proposed. We want to know what's wrong with it, whether there's an Achilles heel that can stop it, or what we can do to fix it and make it operable in a better way. And during a weekend, I would flip through all these technical documents and find the Achilles heels, and it's not that hard to find. Computer modeling is a great way to hide everything.
Yes.
So, recently in Vallejo, California, they had a proposal for a cement grinding plant. They were going to bring in toxic slag from Asia and grind it into cement for cement. Well, this is like a few hundred meters from a grade school. That's downwind from it. When was cement powder a good thing? Grinding toxic waste to turn it into cement isn't something you want to do in town. So the proposal was ridiculous, but it had been ramrodded through, and it was the planning committee 6-1 voted it down. The city council received the advice from the planning committee and decided that they needed to let them go one last round to try and finalize it, but the public comment period was closed. I just moved to town, so no public comment period, but I could look at the documents, and I flipped through the documents, and I saw fraud, just out and out fraud. Their buoyance, they were, if you have a smokestack and you've got stuff going up the stack, you have to model the deposition of the particulates. What goes up does come down. I think we all agree on that. Basic science. What goes up does come down, unless you reach a velocity to escape.
Elon Musk.
Yeah, but the smokestacks don't have that kind of velocity, so we expect what goes up the smokestack to come down. So you have to model that. So you've got rural modeling and you've got urban modeling, because rural, everything was kind of flat with some trees. Urban, you've got buildings with downwash and turbulence and whatnot. So they used the wrong model. They used a buoyancy coefficient that floats particles. Regulators look at 2.5 micron size particles. So they floated everything from 2 microns on down. Now, 2 microns floats about as well as a bowling ball. 0.2 microns, a little Brownian motion kind of keeps them bouncing up almost like a gas. So if you use real values, 0.2 on down, probably you can float. However, particulates at 1 micron in size adsorb 99% of all the heavy metal toxicity onto these superfine particles, and they go straight into your lung and do not come out. 1 micron sized particles are respirable, but they go into your alveoli and are absorbed it's like an injection. So they're they're floating 99% of all the toxic heavy metals out of their model of exposure. So the toxic exposure of the plant is under modeled. And when you see them doing things like that and other things, yeah, that they had done lots of things. I lined up all the things that they had done wrong, and the acronym for all the things they had done wrong spelled bullshit somehow. So I, I handed that document to the Air Quality Management District, and the staff there circulated it in the regulatory body like the funniest joke they'd ever seen. You know, I think this project is bullshit. So and it was in my comments were in a 5-minute public comment period before the city council, not part of the regulatory process at all, not at all. They could have gone, your 5 minutes are up, leave us, don't ever come back. And I wouldn't have had any recourse, but somebody heard me say their document is a fraud. You should actually charge them because they submitted under penalty of perjury. You should charge them with perjury because the document's no good. Somebody heard that, went to the state district attorney general, and he assigned a 35-year experienced EIR specialist to look at the document. A couple weeks later, the city got a letter from the state saying you can't use the document for this project for the basis for a decision. It basically, they agreed with my position. This document is so full of holes, you can't use it. So it killed the project with a 5-minute comment, having looked at their computer modeling and found a couple of Achilles heels in the project. Yeah. But I had already killed a couple of other projects. One, a garbage burning plant in North Richmond, California, which at the time was almost all poor black people. Now it's mixed Asian population as well. It's still very, very, very poor. In a community like that, the people living there are looking, where's the next step going to be? They don't look at the horizon line at what project is coming down the pike at them, so they don't see it coming even really. And we came in outsiders, you know, that's none of our business. I got a big nose. I stick it in everybody's business. And you know, I commented on the buoyancy calculations and the lack of proper modeling and whatnot. And their project had to redo a bunch of modeling. Anyway, they came to a stop as well. They sued me for $42 million for the loss of the contract with PG&E for selling power. Well, that's a slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. And a slap suit, what do? You have to slap back. You know, you can't just let them slap you. You've got to slap back. So I countersued the 5 directors of the district personally. Not the district, but I sued the directors personally. They didn't have D&O insurance.
Yes.
So we could go after them individually.
Yes.
$50,000 apiece. Their suit was thrown out of court with the judge actually chastising him in open court, not in chambers, but in open court. If I ever see anything like this from you again, I'll have your license to the lawyer. Anyway.
Don't mess with Jay.
Their suit went away. My suit won. But, you know, $250,000 of bad karma money you don't want, you know. So the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund is there to receive money like that. And I didn't want it. You know, this litigation money is, I just assume leave that for somebody else. So, and I had a good lawyer, and he represented me well. And so somebody's not going to have a good lawyer, and they're going to have the money. So
don't mess with Jay. Mike, question for you.
Gosh.
You study a lot of things, okay? You're a chiropractor, neurofeedback, dietary. Everybody's got something but it's not just one thing. It's like an aggregation of life. How do you explain that to somebody? Because we're in a society where, hey man, just fix it. What's the problem? Just fix it. I want the answer right now. Where's the pill? How do you deal with that?
Oh yeah, I love that question. Jay, thank you. I just have to say I'm still reeling from your story. I'm so excited about your nailing these captured agencies and these captured people, and I could talk all day and ask you more questions. I'm so excited about what you did, and this is the biggest need there is. So anyway, I'm sorry, Pete.
Well, hold on. You can find more on the Jay Gunkelman story.
That's my avocation. I never ever take any money for my avocation. I do that for fun.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's something I was just talking yesterday with James Lyons Weiler, who's a scientist who was studying some of the same type of injustice of toxins with regard to children and outcomes in different vaccines with Paul Thomas, and he does a lot of air quality work too, which is kind of a non sequitur right here. But the point is, we were talking about toxicology in the air, toxicology in vaccines, toxicology of adjuvants, toxicology of everything just yesterday. And so I'm so glad to be talking to you about this. And I really think that EEG is going to be one of the ways, along with some of this laser spectral analysis and other types of particulate analysis with regard to adsorption that you talked about. I think there's going to be a lot more discovery coming out because there's so many captured agencies and so much badness happening. And there just isn't enough technical people with time to chase it down, and I'm willing to do it. You're willing to do it, and we have to talk about this more, Jay. We have to talk about this more. So anyway, this is the most important thing.
Well, it's what I've done for fun. I'm STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and when you're a STEM person, you look around. There's STEM things all over the place to deal with, and if you can't figure out something to focus on, you're just scattered. That's your problem, not that there's not something to focus on.
It's a target-rich environment, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Well, Pete, so I think that's a target-rich environment too. I talk to patients all the time, and I try to tell them, like a STEM person, I say you got to think a little bigger than your average MD or your average, crack-the-back chiropractor. You've got to think broader. You got to think about, okay, if I've got a bunch of things going on in my life, let's first list them all so we know they're there and we're not unaware of them, and then let's prioritize them. And that's hard. I'm not going to tell you that isn't hard. And it shifts. Sometimes a person presents and their main complaint in their life is those migraines. And then after they do some work, it ain't the migraines anymore. It's the dysmenorrhea. And so their priorities shift and the severity shifts and the severity of their lab findings, the severity of their imaging findings, the aggression of whatever pathology is happening to them changes. But I try to start them out with kind of an explanation of, how did I get in this bloody big mess? And so we have a longer conversation usually in the first few visits where I try to talk about, let's draw a timeline of your life from when you were born until now, and how did all these different things blossom in your life, and are they related to each other, or are they less related, or are they more related? Did one thing drive the next thing? And so I try to figure that stuff out. Jay, do you think that your brain tumor was from those chemicals exposure?
No. My brain tumor happened before I was a fetus. Mine was a Rathke pouch cyst, which is a form of craniopharyngioma. When you start out as a fertilized single cell, 2 cells, 4 cells, you form a little round blastula, and then you flatten out and roll into a tube. And the neural tube, when it forms, when it seals some outside cells on the inside. Mm-hmm. Everything inside the tube and outside the tube are epithelial cells. They're like skin cells for outside of you, but your internal pathway is also outside of you. So, but you seal some epithelial cells in the endothelium. Normally, they're found at autopsy as a benign finding. My Rathke pouch cyst had saved me from an AVM, which it had surrounded.
My goodness.
The AVM ruptured repeatedly for 42 years, blowing the cyst up like a balloon, slowly, smashing the pituitary. The cella turcica is supposed to be half the size of the tip of a little finger, about the size of a pea. And it's a bony cleft that the pituitary hangs down in. My cella turcica is the size of a golf ball.
Yeah.
and it's gigantic.
Yeah, here you go. This is what Jay's talking about.
Yeah, down the little tiny bony cleft where your pituitary hangs down in it, and mine, the tumor eroded that cleft. So, but it couldn't contain the entire tumor. So the body of the tumor was in the cella, and the tail of the tumor wrapped up over the top of the chiasm. So I had a yin-yang symbol. My MRI looks like a yin-yang symbol, half of one in the middle of my head. I'm a little Taoist by tendency, so I had to get a copy of that image to keep,
I had no idea of any of this, Jay. Thank you. Holy cow.
Well,
anyway,
you can watch the Jay Gunkelman story parts 1, 2, and 3.
Well, I saw the documentary. But
the documentary doesn't go into a lot of stuff. All my environmental stuff is kind of that's they shot 36 hours of film and came up with the 2 hours of the documentary. If they would have focused on the environmental end of things and my weird health in more depth or something, that it would have been an unworkable project. So.
An Oliver Stone project, right?
yeah. As a documentary, it turned out pretty well. I mean, London Film Festival, we won the feature-length documentary award, the best documentary, and also the Science Award for International London Film Festival. So, although I couldn't get into the Fargo Film Festival, I grew up in Fargo, so.
That's weird. What were you talking about a minute ago, Pete? You were talking about
I was just trying, parents, let's just talk. Johnny comes in and, hey, I want to, he's got ADHD. Here's a Snickers bar. Go sit in the basement and play video games. Everybody's got something. It's just not one thing. It's an aggregation of life. And how do you explain that to the parents that, hey, look, it's exercise, it's diet, it's DNA, right? It's a holistic. When they hear holistic, I don't think they dig that term.
Well, Pete, I mean, this is a good question, and I think we have a cultural amnesia. And so what I try to tell parents is I try to tell them stories. I say, there was this guy, and I have all these wonderful names of people in my head. I'll be like, there was this guy, Jay Gunkelman, who did this thing. Or there was this guy, Ben Feingold, who was looking at hyperactive children. Or there was this guy, Robert Mendelsohn, called the medical heretic, that talked about when you go to the hospital, you got to bring a tribe with you to make sure that you don't get them to take the wrong organ out. You've got to talk about Duff Wilson in Quincy, Washington, who worked with Patty Martin to look at fertilizer and how toxic fertilizer was brought in and spread around the United States, and how Patty's husband got brain tumors, and you've got to tell the story of other people that have already faced this stuff. So what I do is I tell them stories. I say, did you ever hear about the Nestle boycott that happened when I was a child? Did you ever hear about the problems of General Mills and the problems of Monsanto and the problems that Vandana Shiva has fought against? Have you heard these stories? And then when they start to discover that there is a long tide of injustice behind them about food and about chemistry and about heavy metals and about captured agencies, the kind of work that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is doing
Earn up to 16 CEU hours by attending Applied Neurosciences NeuroGuide workshops in Madeira Beach, Florida. They're led by none other than Dr. Robert Thatcher himself. There are 2 ways you can attend, online or in person, with a link, appliedneuroscience.com/attend-NG-workshops. Earn up to 16 CEU hours. Sign up now at appliedneuroscience.com/attend-NG-workshops.
Mary Holland, his general counsel, I mean, they're suing the pants off of these agencies, and they're winning, and it's working. But it's slow, and it costs a lot of money. So anyway, I try to tell them stories about, you're not the only parent who has a kid that might have a problem that reacts to food. Have you heard of haptens? Have you heard of lectins? I draw a lot of bad art on the screen because I'm a terrible artist, and I have whiteboards everywhere. In fact, that whole wall is a whiteboard in my office right here. This is my home office in Denver. But I've got whiteboards everywhere, and I draw terrible art. And I think, it's good because the worse of an artist you are, the better you can teach, because you draw such dumb stuff that you it makes people really get it, because it's 4 lines and a circle. I suck at art, but because of that, I don't use a lot of color. I just use a big fat marker, and I use a lot of white paper and a lot of whiteboards, and I just draw stuff. And so as I do that, I try to tell them the story of what's gone on and what the history was, and if this has happened before, if it's something that other parents have dealt with, and maybe there's a group like the Feingold Network, or maybe there's a group like the Carnivore Group, or some kind of like Low Carb Down Under is a really wonderful channel on cardiologists and lipidologists. I mean, when you see a lipidologist talk about Lipitor and triglycerides and LDL and VLDL, and they just blow the statins out of the water, it's amazing. I didn't even know lipidologists existed before several years ago. You just have to watch these things. So I try to turn people onto YouTube. I try to turn people onto channels like yours, because we've got to educate them, but we've got to compress that education into minutes. So we have to do something really fast that grabs them and says, hey, this might be related to your kid's symptom. Do you know that zinc and copper have a lot to do with violent behavior? Do you know about William Walsh, who looked at 10,000 violent criminals in the Chicago prison system? And he was able to diagnose most of them with some kind of imbalance in their chemistry and repair them and make them nonviolent. 10,000 people in the Chicago prison system. This is Bill Walsh, and he's still alive today. He's a mentor of mine. I just had a class with him last month. He's doing it right now. He's doing, and for the last 7 years, he's looked at addiction. In fact, Jay, I wanted to ask you again, in 72, 74, something like that, you did some work with addiction. And you really brought forth a couple of different waves in EEG, that you were reversing addiction with 2 different profiles of the addicted brain.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to mention that again, if you wouldn't mind. I'm sorry, Pete, if I derailed you. I'm dying of curiosity here. Can you mention that again, Jay?
Sure, not a problem. From 72 to 75, I had the state hospital lab, the first state hospital lab in North Dakota, Jamestown, at the state hospital. And it was in the alcoholism drug division. And so, and we were looking at EEGs. And of course, the alcoholic, the classic EEG in an alcoholic is a low voltage fast EEG with no alpha. And, dial back to 1972. What are your EEG training options back then? Well, SMR or alpha, Kamiya or Sturman. And maybe Burbaumer if you're into European slow particle potential, but basically, somebody with no alpha. I'm 21 years old. I'm thinking, gee, no alpha. Maybe we should try some alpha. So no depth to the neuroscience, just kind of plugging along. But we trained alpha, and the people that learned alpha training, when they were discharged, didn't come back. And in a state hospital with a 90+% recidivism rate, when somebody doesn't come back, they notice it. And they start to think, well, what'd they do, die in a bar fight? Or, so something happened, but they're not coming back. And so we literally wrote a grant in 1974 for NIH to fund, which they did not fund. But we had we successfully trained alpha in alcoholics. Now, Peniston's work came out in 88, 89 when they published. Now, they had done it for a few years before that, but that was a totally separate group from us. And basically, when I came up with a phenotype model, I wanted to look back at addiction because we had seen the alpha training, and everybody's talking about alpha theta training in addiction as a protocol for the DSM category of addiction. Mm-hmm. So being into the phenotype model, we wanted 30 people so we could start to look at the data a little bit. And when we looked at the data, we found the phenotypes that were present, 2/3 of the addicted population had overarousal. And in the EEG, that's either very fast alpha, which is you have to have a high arousal level to have fast alpha, or if your alpha is so fast it's no longer rhythmic, that's a low voltage fast classic like the alcoholics, or beta spindling. Those are 3 overarousal patterns, and all 3 of those patterns in the phenotype paper in 2005, we matched them up with alpha theta training. Now, the beta spindle gets SMR, then alpha theta. The low voltage fast gets some SMR and then alpha theta. But alpha theta was definitely part of the training, a key part of the training for 2/3 of the addicted population. The other 1/3 didn't have an overarousal; it had a cingulate problem. They had an OCD drive, not an arousal problem. So they have to fix their obsessive compulsive drive towards the addiction, or they'll simply switch. Oh, I can't drink anymore? Okay, I'll gamble. I can't gamble anymore? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, the cingulate is really very flexible. It'll find something to lock onto. Symptom substitution will happen. So Peniston got 70% success, and everybody thought that was so fabulous. The 30% he wasn't getting needed anterior cingulate work. At the end of 1 year follow-up, we had 30 people, still all clean and sober, all had Woodcock-Johnson standard score improvements of about 20 points. They went from about normal to superior. Delayed recall was terrible when it went to normal, but this was all published in a special edition of the Biofeedback, which is AAPB's kind of a magazine-like journal. Anyway, basically we tried to look at the phenotype model and addiction to see what the phenotype distribution was, and it ended up giving us a little bit of an insight into the drive mechanisms underlying addiction. And in psychology, isn't it supposed to be the case that if you eliminate the drive, that the behavior goes away? So that's all we were doing, is eliminating the drive of overarousal or a cingulate problem. And sure enough, the addictive behavior that was associated with it just disappeared. Wow.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And that AAPB paper was also 2005, or is it the same paper?
The 2005 paper was the original phenotype model. The addiction one, I think we wrote in 2015.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Wow. Sorry, Pete. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I got this opportunity to
hey guys, I'm here for you. I'm just
I can't help myself.
It's a free for all. Question. Okay, so you're explaining it to the parents. Hey, this is what's going on. Parents say, okay, just send it to my insurance company. Okay. Alternative, the DSM, paying for it. Okay, cash clients. I hate pointing the finger without offering a solution, and I brought this up before, and some people have poked holes in it. And Dr. Mike, I'm looking to see what you think of it.
I like where you're going.
Call it the Jay Gunkelman pledge, call it the NeuroNoodle, whatever it is. If you have free time, because there are some clinics, offices that have free time and they have some technicians, you have gaps in the schedule. Whatever you pay that technician, pledge that, hey, you know what? For Johnny that's out there that can't afford the full price of an EEG, come on in on that free time. I'll do it at cost. What is cost? It's cost, air quotes. Whatever you pay the tech, run an EEG. Here's the report, no diagnosis, just so you have the 30 pieces of paper or whatever the software is that you use. God forbid something happens, at least there's a baseline to compare it to, and it gets people used to, hey, you know what? That EEG isn't that bad. What do you guys think? Poke some holes, Mike.
Well, I want to give you just a touch of background on me. 30 years ago, I actually did run a free clinic in Missouri. And it was all free, completely free to the people of the Ozarks, which is the second poorest region of the United States. And we worked with a lot of families and people in the area. It's rather close to the Bentonville, Arkansas corporate head of Walmart, for example, down there in the corner of Missouri. And we had a retreat center where we would help people, and we certainly charged for that. But none of it was insurance. None of it was accepted by insurance. None of it was accepted by Medicare and none of that stuff. So we did this work. We kind of had a parallel program. We had actually, I was a peon, there. I was a clinical director. I wasn't on the board of directors. I was a clinical director, and so I was responsible for food, and I was responsible for diets and supplements and examinations and record keeping. And we had a orthomolecular psychiatrist who was in charge of all the mental health and the counseling. And he taught me a ton of stuff. But in any case, we had a staff of about 30, and we had bought, they had bought, I didn't buy any of this. I was a kid, I just got out of school. It was my first job. And they had bought the U.S. Olympic Judo Training Center and turned a 2,000-acre facility into a 100-bed retreat. And so we were taking on all kinds of things from eating disorders to depression and anxiety to family issues and seizure disorders, all kinds of stuff. We had a retreat where we could control the food, we could control the environment, we could, it was a little bit before the internet as it is today, so it was, it wasn't quite such a problem with cell phones, and we kind of had people put their machines in lockers and only use their computers one day a week or their phones one day a week. They could access them. But back then, it wasn't such a big deal. So they would do workshops, and all day long they were doing workshops, they would sleep there. And so I really enjoy giving back to the public, and one of the ideas I'm working on right now with my web designer is we're working on a program in the future to do some kind of grand rounds where the patient never pays, where the grand rounds is an online system with doctors from around the world, and the patient comes on, they'll go through a filter system where they have to sign some waivers, but once they're on, if they're willing to give up a little privacy, they don't have to pay a dime, ever. And so I'm working on that, and it's got a lot of bugs, but we're working through it, and it's going to come out sometime in the future, and it'll be a paid program, like when you watch Joe Rogan, but you have to pay for it. But the person, the actual guest, I can't call them a patient because at this point the regulatory agencies would make sure that they're not considered a patient, but they're a guest, and that guest pays nothing. And we do follow-ups, and we follow people, and we be responsible, and we take care of them. And they get doctors from around the world, including, I've got doctors from Europe, doctors from Asia. Imagine if you could just get online from, a little hut in Africa and use your little cell phone and have 15 doctors from all over the world weigh in and take a look and say what you might consider doing next. So anyway, let's get back to your EEG idea. So please, you asked me about the EEG idea. So the EEG idea is fantastic, and I love that. And I do quite a number of free scans. And so tell me a little more. What you're proposing that all of us as practitioners do EEGs and submit them, or
everybody's operating in a silo. And let's just say that there's an advisory board. Jay Gunkelman's the head of it, and it's an approved place. You've gone through the training and whatnot, so you know what you're doing. And you just have free time where you just pay the technician whatever it costs for them to do the scan, and you do it, and you just give them the report, the PDF, whatever, and that's it. You don't, no diagnosis, nothing. But something happens in the future, at least they have that initial snapshot of the brain. Now, a lot of things could happen between now and then. I get it, but at least it gets them in the habit of, hey, you know what? It's not that bad. The barrier to entry is the price of the amplifiers, and those are coming way down. It's going to be to a point where we're going to be sending these things to households so they do it themselves. But till we get to that point, there are so many athletes that are out there. There's so many counselors that could use this. And there's so many individual practitioners. This isn't regulated. I mean, you guys know this. So everybody's operating in their silo, and it's been going on since the early 70s. I'm trying to organize everybody to come together with a brand that can go worldwide. It says, oh, I know what that is. Okay, I trust that. Jay's watching over it. Go on in and get a scan. And that could also be a marketing opportunity for the clinic that they want to come back. Hey, wait a minute. What's this big word mean? And they go to Dr. Google and say, I'd like to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Pete, your idea is brilliant. You must have been inside my head. I've been talking with a company that I have been advising for years that does a lot of work, free work for the military and for soldiers and stuff. And it used to be called Serascan, and now it's called Illume AI. And what they were is a bunch of really brilliant defense computer guys that started doing SPECT imaging and PET imaging. And the PET imaging and SPECT imaging fell apart over the years because General Electric wouldn't reduce the cost of the patent that expired on the fluid that you have to inject intravenously to get a SPECT image. You have to inject a radioactive dye that pretty much emits gamma rays, not gamma waves, but gamma rays, radiation. And of course that's picked up by a CT scanner. Jay, you know all this, but I'm telling this for the public watching. So they moved from doing this scanning to a model of doing data processing. And what they're trying to do right now is they're working with the ISNR and Mark Jones to actually work to have you, Jay, lead a program that they're already talking with Mark about, to lead a program where any members could submit data that's been standardized by a team of ISNR people that decide, okay, what's each clinic going to submit? Psychometrics, QEGs, ERPs, lab data, maybe static posturography, which I'm into because posturography affects mental health. Hey, it does. Since 2005, we've kind of known some of this. Anyway, the cerebellum has a role in depression, we think. Anyway, so let me just, I digress. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a system where the members could be able to, each individual clinic could do exactly what Pete's saying. They could fall under a brand and they could submit data with varying levels of permission and varying levels of de-identification so that they can be analyzed by individuals with eyes or eye. And it can also be analyzed through AI, because AI is not smart. It can't do everything, and it can miss some really obvious things. So we need to have a combination of two things. But the neat thing about this is we'd be able to query the data and ask for correlations using some edge and vertex theory, which is part of the information process. Now I'm no data scientist like Regine Eichler West, who was my mentor for the QEG diplomate. She's a data scientist, and she could go on and on about this, but that's what they're working on, is they're trying to be able to create a system that does exactly what Pete says, that would run through, say, Jay and Yuri, and be able to say, here's a bunch of data, let's collect it all, let's hoover it up, and let's analyze it using edges and vertices with this I think it's called group theory or dynamic theory or something. I got it in a file over there. The scientist told me about it this week, and I forget the name of it. I think it's called group theory, but anyway, they look at all this stuff and where they meet, and they can be able to query not just articles on the internet, on PubMed, but they can also query the data that we submit. Now, we could submit one person's data, like, say, the famous Greg Charbonneau has some wonderful data from his clinic. He would be able to query one patient over the course of many, many, many visits. He's got hundreds of visits of an individual, pre and post QEGs and serial QEGs. He's got every data point from every neurofeedback session. He's got every medication they're on. He's got every diagnosis they've been given. So he could plumb and query that one patient for data. He could also query every patient with that same diagnosis in his practice. He could add his to other people that had gathered data and query multiple practices that had patients with crossover diagnoses, like dual diagnoses. And so the power of this tool is unbelievable. And the University of Colorado, Colorado University at Anschutz Medical Center, just down the road from me, is using it right now with Illume AI, looking at bipolar disorder and predictive analytics for children before they become old enough to be officially diagnosed with bipolar, and predicting which ones will be diagnosed with bipolar versus not. So there's a huge opportunity, and it's already in motion to get toward you. And if it hasn't got to you yet, Mark will be talking to you about it, because they're working on it, and they have lots of plans and lots of work with the military, and they want you. So Pete, your idea is perfect. Keep doing it. Yes, you are right.
Mike, what I'm looking for is open source, where there's a depository where you strip the person, the data.
That's what this would be.
Okay.
This would be a huge database. One place, one database. It all goes in one place. Yep.
And it's the battle of the business plans, the databases.
Yeah.
Capitalism. God bless it, but it's we still have a bunch of people saying mine is best. And when you do that, the public looks at it. It's like, I don't know what to pick, so I'm not going to pick anything, or I don't believe anything.
Well, If those people do that, they're inexperienced, because what usually happens when something gets big enough is you have joint ventures, and they all just work together and they make agreements. So that, to me, that's not an obstacle. To me, all you do is take the databases and make agreements and scopes and boundaries and contracts that are joint ventures, and they all work together and they all share the data, and they all divide the pie. That's done in corporate America all the time.
Jay, you got more in your little pinky finger than I know about this. What do you think?
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, I think that your approach would be ideal to present to high school and college level sports. The pros are already on their own pathway towards getting these kind of things, but you've got to do this early. I mean, by the time you're in the pros, how many whacks of the head do you think you might have had? You know, and which one of them may have been significant enough to have had you probably, want to take a little break and recover before you get back on the field. So if you have a baseline study, you can then actually compare it to something after an event, whatever the event might be. Whether it's an event that you think has damaged your ability to function, or I don't know anybody that's been hit in the head and it suddenly turned into the genius, but if that happened, you'd end up having a baseline for that as well. But having a base EEG ends up allowing them to make a conclusion. There's a lot of borderline findings that don't stand out unless you can show that these are new or different than what the baseline was. And quite honestly, if you're looking for gigantic Z-score outliers, quite often it's more subtle than that. And it's not necessarily a gigantic Z-score. You have to remember, Z-scores in the databases are univariate measures. And we have a multivariate processor going here. You can have a highly abnormal multivariate pattern where every measurement within the multivariate is okay in univariate space, but the multivariate pattern is abnormal.
And that's exactly what Illume AI is doing. It's amazing. You're right on. I'm so excited to hear that.
Right hemisphere, a half a Z-score high in delta, left hemisphere, a half a Z-score low. Oh, nothing significant here in univariate space. In multivariate space, you go, oh my God, this guy's having a stroke, or something's significantly wrong here.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have dramatic asymmetry like that, but it's not dramatic in univariate space. It's dramatic in multivariate space.
Mm-hmm. I just think there's something out there with, let's just take 23andMe, where the more you put your data in, the more the percentages of likelihood come out. It's like Waze. You know what? I saw a cop. I'm going to put it in there because I may need that information, one day, paying it forward. There's got to be some mix where DNA and the scans are in the one place, and it shouldn't cost that much to have better mental health. And then the people that read the EEGs, where there's money in that, do that, right?
Yeah.
Quit hoarding all the information.
Getting the baseline study for cost, or even for free, if it develops your practice, having a loss leader is not a bad idea.
Yep.
It's done in marketing all the time. Happy Meals.
That's a win. That's kind of where I'm saying it's a win-win. You have downtime. You can keep your tech employed so they don't skip out to another clinic. And then you have this steady flow of people that are coming in, and they're going to take it back home, do their Dr. Google, and say, you know what, let me see what's going on here. And the high schools and colleges, Jay, you're right on, the learning disabilities and all that, dyslexic. I don't even get into it, but guys, we've really worked overtime here, man. Dr. Mike, we got to bring you back on, man. You got game.
I'm so happy. Jay, thank you so much. Pete, this has just been a dream of mine. I am so happy to talk to you guys. James Lyons Weiler yesterday. I mean, it's like Christmas in December.
Christmas in Tucson City.
Well, we're hoping to have another little gathering next year, and the Yacht Club is happy to have us back if we make it. So
yeah, well, I'm a member now.
I wouldn't miss it for the world. I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thanks for your time and interest. I have to say, we're trying to avoid later life problems before they can even exist if we can as well.
Yes.
In Richmond, California right now, AstraZeneca has a toxic site that they capped, but there's no side barriers, and the cap, when sea level rise and groundwater rise happens, are going to bring up the TCE into bioavailability in the homes they're trying to build on top of this toxic site.
Oh my.
Now, TCE, trichloroethylene, is a solvent, highly toxic, just directly toxic, but low-level exposure leads to Parkinson's disease. So let's say you lived in an apartment building that was built on top of this toxic waste site that they're saying is cleaned up. Well, we're not saying it's cleaned up. In fact, we've got a pretty good argument that it's not cleaned up, and we're in the midst of that with the Department of Toxic Substance Control here in California, trying to get them to change their ancient sea level rise prediction levels to more modern prediction levels that are going to show that this actually will mobilize the toxicity into public exposure. So, and we've got academics from UC Berkeley and politicians. The city of Richmond City Council was just voted in an entirely new slate of people that are going to end up stopping these kinds of projects that were ill-conceived, environmentally, but economically, proposed.
And that was Richmond, Virginia, Jay?
This was AstraZeneca, which was a Stauffer and General Chemical site at one point in Richmond.
Richmond, Virginia?
Richmond, California.
I'm sorry, Richmond. Sorry, Richmond, California.
Yeah,
yes, sir. Thank you.
And the AstraZeneca site basically was that they have deeply buried toxic substances, and they've dumped other toxic stuff to mix with it to neutralize it, and all sorts of things like that. They've tried to concretize the soil to keep it from being mobilized. But, groundwater coming up is going to mobilize all of that. And the number of sites that are along the bay that were capped from the top but not from the sides are going to end up being all mobilized. It's just a matter of time. And there's actually a large group, environmental consortium, that's focusing on that issue. I've been involved in that at a fairly high level, but right now I'm much more focused on sea level rise for the town I'm in, because 1 foot of sea level rise will wipe out about 800 homes here.
Yeah.
So,
God, I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you, Jay.
Anyway, it's been fun. Have a great day, and we'll have to do this again.
The NeuroNoodle Podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Like our gold supporter, Applied Neuroscience, and our silver supporter, Mind Media. Earn up to 16 CEU hours by attending Applied Neuroscience's NeuroGuide workshops. In Madeira Beach, Florida, they're led by none other than Dr. Robert Thatcher himself. There are 2 ways you can attend, online or in person, with the link appliedneuroscience.com/attend-NG-workshops. Earn up to 16 CEU hours. Sign up now at appliedneuroscience.com/attend mind-media.com/EEG-workshops. Mind Media, get the latest EEG and neurofeedback technology from mindmedia.com. Their semi-dry sensor caps is a wonder to see, and their EEG amplifiers have been trusted in the field for decades. Their neurofeedback and QEEG courses will get you up to speed in no time. Visit mindmedia.com now.